So first off, I'll just make note here of this slide. I misspoke in the last lecture. The Adhan, or call to prayer, will begin the next lecture, not this one. Very sorry for the confusion. But today we'll begin our discussion of the 5 pillars of Islam, what I called in the last lecture the 5 pillars of Muslim practice. Again, when somebody talks about the 5 pillars, these pillars of practice is what they're most certainly talking about. These 5 pillars are the active ritual expressions that help to form the core, the common denominator of Muslim experience. In them, we'll see clearly the way in which Islam is egalitarian. It's set up to be an aspect of the tradition that we don't often hear about these days. These pillars are considered duties to God, but they're also set up in such a way as to highlight the importance of and to actively support the flourishing of the entire ummah, with special attention paid to the poor, the sick, those who are physically or financially in need. It's not to say that sort of Islam is better at social justice than any other tradition we'll look at. That's not what I mean, but that it is a tradition that actually is set up at its most foundational core, both of faith and of practice, and we see it in the practice. Its most foundational practices, those that are considered mandated, a duty to Allah, they themselves respond to social justice. So lots of traditions do respond well, and it's not that Muslims are better at it or anything else, but that it's an integral part of the actual foundation of their faith experience. That's what I want to highlight, the special attention that is through these pillars paid to the poor, the sick, those who are in any way physically or financially in need. So we'll go through them in order, covering only the first 2 in this lecture. Next time we'll look at the last 3 of them. And the first of the pillars is the Shahada, or the declaration of faith, the proclamation of faith. The word means to testify. That's what its root comes from. It is it's a testifying. That's what's being done here. In English, it reads, "I proclaim that there is no God but God, and Muhammad is his messenger." The first half of the statement, "There is no God but God," confirms Tawheed. Remember we talked about that last time? The unity of Allah, considered, and this first half is considered by Muslims to be the universal, eternal oneness of God. It is a universal truth, right? The second half of this proclamation, and Muhammad is his messenger, this statement makes the proclamation itself specifically Muslim. And here we see the word messenger, or Rasul, used again. That's messenger, or that special kind of prophet. And we saw in our discussion of prophecy last time, we saw this come up. Remember that prophets confirm the word of God. Messengers add to the law. They bring a new revelation. So the Shahada is understood to be a fresh transmission of a timeless, primordial faith in one God. Islam sees itself as the final link in a chain of prophecy that goes back to Adam, understood to be the first human. So the honest public proclamation of the Shahada is the only ritual of conversion to Islam. If you want to convert to Islam, this is your ritual of conversion. Now, this doesn't mean that saying these words makes one a Muslim. I can say them here, and my pronunciation is just in all languages other than English pretty lacking. But it's a beautiful. Shahada sounds absolutely beautiful, rolling off of the tongue of somebody who speaks it natively. But and I recommend that you just find somebody who does. But it's got a ring to it. So, but I can say it. I can say La ilaha illa Allah Muhammadun Rasulullah. But if I don't say those words with a sincere faith and an authentic commitment to the truth that they proclaim, then I'm not a Muslim. That didn't just make me a Muslim. It's an honest, sincere, committed public proclamation that's required. And we'll see this again with Buddhism. It's an understanding of language as as itself active, as doing something, but performative. It's a version of performative speech. The speech itself does something. It's like if I say to you, "I promise," then I've done something with that speech. And we talked about that with the Genesis narrative. But it's not just the words themselves that perform this mechanism, that act as this mechanism. It is a sincere, honest public proclamation. And that's your ritual of conversion. So the first words of the Shahada, or the words of the Shahada, are the first thing whispered into the ears of a newborn, and the last thing whispered into the ears of the dying. The words carry with them a deep cultural weight, and they've become an important part of the calligraphic tradition, the tradition of calligraphy that we've talked about. So remember that most of the Muslim world has become, especially in recent centuries, aniconic. And when I say that, that means without icons, without images, resistant of figural representation, and that calligraphy and the geometrical arabesque form we looked at last time have both developed more or less in response to that aniconism. And what you see here is an example of a relatively common artistic practice within the Muslim world where the letters of the Shahada have been formed into the figure of a praying person. For many, this kind of thing is just shy of the unacceptable. You know, you're kind of towing the line, like, is it figural, is it not? Well, it's actually words, it's calligraphy, but, well, we put them in a certain shape here. So it's towing that line, but generally considered acceptable. And here we have the Shahada again, in a form that is, for most Muslims, just on the other side of that line. You know, it is in the unacceptable realm. The general Muslim position on tattoos is that once a person becomes a Muslim, he or she is forgiven all those deeds committed before their conversion. But according to the Hadith, which is again that secondary sacred canon that records the words and deeds of the prophet, and there's a series of texts that are considered the most reliable. According to the Hadith, tattooing one's body is considered haram. Often has two A's at the end, or forbidden. So tattooing the Shahada on one's body, which one would generally do only after becoming a Muslim, it's not allowed, strictly speaking. But I include the image here of this, you know, pretty well done, pretty beautiful, full, you know, shoulder back tattoo of the Shahada, as, you know, I include it here not as an example of what it looks like to be a bad Muslim, or any such thing like that, but rather to illustrate a point that I've made a few times during this course, that religious acceptability is interpreted and lived into differently by individuals with varying attitudes toward commandments and prohibitions. You know, religion is not a force that exists in the abstract. It exists as it is particularized in the lives of individuals. So, you know, from a different tradition, another example, while the Catholic Church prohibits the use of any birth control method other than natural planning, a 2012 Gallup poll showed that just over 80% of American Catholics believe that other methods of birth control are acceptable. And something, you know, it depends on the poll, but something more like 90+% of, you know, sexually active women of a reproductive age in the Catholic Church are using other forms of birth control and feel totally fine with that, right? And as anyone who has spent his or her time in a religious community can tell you, religious people don't always choose to follow all the rules of their chosen religion. Now, whether or not this makes them good Muslims or good Catholics or good anything else is something that is often determined by religious authorities and communities, you know. People sort of decide on that and judge, but it isn't something that religious studies scholars take a stand on. You know, so we study, we strive to understand, but our studies do not prepare us to measure a person's righteousness or piety, you know, nor are they meant to. So I point that out as an example of how, you know, it's not the only one you can find. You could do a web search for Shahada tattoos. You'll find a lot of them, even though strictly speaking, it is haram. Okay, so moving on to the second pillar of practice, which is salat, or prayer. The call to prayer, or adhan, which again we'll hear at the beginning of the next lecture, is heard 5 times a day in Muslim countries throughout the world, almost always in Arabic. Answering to that call is obligatory for all able-bodied Muslims who are past the age of puberty. The adhan is sung. So again, the adhan, which we'll see next time, is sung by the muezzin, which is I'll write it here. Muezzin, which is the one who it is the name of the person who calls to prayer from the minarets of a mosque, if those are available. If they're not, it's not always through minarets, but if, you know, the purpose of the architectural feature of the minaret, by the way, is so that somebody could stand up there and be heard from a large, and we'll look at pictures of those in just a sec, from a large, around a large area. So Here's an image of the Hagia Sophia, and you can see the minarets around it. This is a great sort of moment in religious history, a great architectural moment, built in the 6th century as an Orthodox Christian cathedral in what was then known as Constantinople. It's now called Istanbul. In 1453, Constantinople fell to the Muslim Ottoman Empire, and the minarets you see here were added to the cathedral, and they were added because it became a mosque, and you need those. You need the minarets so somebody can stand up there on what you can see as the little ledge and call and be heard to a large region. Since 1934, by the way, the Hagia Sophia has been a museum. It's been secularized and turned into a cultural museum. But this is architecture with a purpose. That's what I want to point out here. So prayer is preceded by a ritual cleansing, a washing of the hands, the mouth, the face, and the feet. And one prays without a book in hand. You can't be reading a book. That's not the point. And for most, you pray only in the classical Arabic of the Quran. No chanting in a foreign language is allowed. Now, these next few images show groups of Muslims praying in various places around the world, and it's just a good sort of tour of it. This is we're in the Ivory Coast here, and look at all these folks, right? And now we're in Malaysia, and it's just as a collective image of prayer. It's pretty amazing. And now we're in Kazakhstan in the snow, so it's sometimes it's cold outside, and one still prays. And here we have Mecca, which we're sort of classically, we imagine classically, and this is an image from the Hajj, which we'll talk about. It's the 5th pillar, but this is sort of the classic site. It is the holiest place in the Muslim world. And you notice here you've got one of these praying men in a wheelchair, and so the need to get down on one's knees and prostrate fully, which is part of the obligatory prayer, isn't mandated on somebody for whom it's not physically possible. And here we have New York City. That's where you get that, and so it's just around the world. I mean, the Ummah is a global population. And here's a sign from an airport in Melbourne where prayer rooms have been provided as a sort of meeting a basic need. And so here's a visual, like, when does one pray? We say 5 times a day, right? The call to prayer is heard 5 times a day. One prays 5 times a day. And here's a nice visual of those times. That's kind of the prayer clock. These times were established by Muhammad. These were the times during which he prayed, right? Dawn, noon, mid-afternoon, sunset, and dusk. So imagine this. I mean, imagine this. There's 1.6 billion Muslims all around the planet bow together at the same level and in the same direction around the clock, and so some do this so frequently that they develop a permanent bruise on their forehead, which is kind of it's an honorific thing. But as the world turns, 1.6 billion humans bow around the planet. It's something like an incredibly worshipful global wave that's continuous. It's pretty amazing. So let's take a moment to talk here about the direction toward which Muslims pray, because you've seen that it's not just lining up for the ease of prostrating and standing up, and you don't want to get in anyone's way. They're all facing the same direction. Initially from the year 610, when Muhammad received his first revelation, Muhammad and his community faced Jerusalem to pray. About a year and a half after the Ummah arrived in Medina, Muhammad received a revelation while he was praying, during prayer, and he turned toward Mecca to pray. And he was followed by his community, and so since 623 CE, Muslims have faced Mecca in prayer. More specifically, they have faced the Kaaba. Now, Muslims do not worship the Kaaba. It's a focal point, and it's the most sacred site in Islam. The word itself means cube, and the structure is believed to have been built by Ibrahim, which is again the Arabic spelling of Abraham. It includes a black stone on its eastern corner which some have suggested as a meteorite, but that for tradition dates to the time of Adam and Eve, when it fell from heaven to show Adam and Eve where to build an altar. And they built the altar, which eventually sort of settled into disarray and was lost during the time of the flood. And it was found once more when Gabriel, the angel who spoke the revelations to Muhammad, when Gabriel showed it to Ibrahim, who built the Kaaba with the help of his son, Ishmael. So they built this cube structure. We heard that in the context of the pre-Muslim Arabian tribal humanism, the Kaaba housed hundreds of statuettes representing local tribal deities. You remember that? In 632, when Muhammad returned to Mecca and won the town's inhabitants over to Islam in an all but bloodless battle, they just sort of, it was a mass conversion. People said, okay. He removed all the idols from the space. In a move that tradition has come to call the cleansing of the Kaaba. Muhammad did this, so there are iconographic representations of this, which I haven't posted, but it is now, on the inside. I have seen pictures, but you're not allowed to. I would never be allowed to go inside. One not being a Muslim is not does not get a passport to Mecca, but it's now a relatively bare space. Some columns which I think are load bearing, but there's no more images. So we'll close this lecture with a few images of the mihrabs. A mihrab is a niche in a wall of a mosque or sometimes of an open courtyard that points in the direction of the Kaaba in Mecca. That direction is known as the Qibla. And the mihrab indicates the Qibla. More often, Muslim prayer rugs, or not often, not always, but often Muslim prayer rugs are ornamented. So if this is your prayer rug, they're sort of ornamented. You can see them woven in with something that looks like it's kind of like this, like it's pointing in the direction of Mecca, which is the way the prayer rug would always face. Architecturally, they run the full gamut. Some are exquisitely well wrought, while others are very simple and simply functional. So this one is from the Great Mosque in Cordoba, Spain, and this one is originally from Iran, but is now located in the Islamic wing, which is relatively new, of the New York's Metropolitan Museum of Art. So if you're ever there, you could take a look at it. And this last one, it's the most simple by far of the three, is from a courtyard. This is an outdoor one. It's from a courtyard in India. So there you have the first two pillars of Muslim practice, and we will begin next time again with the call to prayer, and then move on to the last three pillars.